What about our lips? You talked a second ago about like pursed lips and stuff. What kind of clues do the lips give away?
Yeah. So for me, the lips are the seismograph. The lips are like the emotional seismograph of the body. When we are comfortable and confident, our lips are full of blood, their color changes. The minute we hear something we don't like, blood actually begins to leave the lips and they become narrower, and then we begin to tighten them. You know, if somebody says something I don't like, I might go, right? Or we begin to bite the lip because we're stressed, or we pluck it, pull on it, do all sorts of things to soothe it. But the lips get show a lot of nervous emotion when we're under stress. So they're very much, as is the jaw. Like for instance, if you said something I might not agree with, I'd probably shift my jaw. Because when you shift your jaw, it puts pressure on the TMJ, and that alone says to the brain, go somewhere else. Don't struggle too much with that. So we're always doing something physical to counter anything that the brain might be undergoing.
Tell me about the supersternal notch. What the hell
So the supersternal notch, it has other names. You could call it the little neck dimple. This little area right at the bottom of your throat. It's a deep indentation. This is the most vulnerable part of the human body. All air, food, nutrients, blood, electricity, oxygen, everything goes through there. And what happens is, and one of the things that I found was that there was nothing in the literature in 1975, 76. I'm looking and I'm noticing that when people are nervous, they immediately cover their neck. They touch their neck. You know, in the literature, you hear about, she, clutched her pearls, right? Rubbing that men tend to do it more robustly because of testosterone. Women tend to more directly touch the supersternal notch. And what I found is when there's lack of confidence, insecurities, fear, apprehensions, or concerns, that people will go, oh my God, did you see that? Right? Oh, it's gone. It's back. And, why is it all directed at this little area of the neck? And why do men clutch their necks and massage their necks when it's the worst thing you can do in negotiations, by the way, is touch your neck, because what you're transmitting is weakness. Somebody whose confidence never touches the neck. You just don't. You don't go anywhere near the neck, and you don't ventilate, because what you're saying is you're getting to me. Ventilating behaviors.
Wait, sorry, when you say ventilate, you mean giving yourself air?
Yeah.
So it could be...
So ventilating behaviors are behaviors of weakness, because your body temperature has changed at 1/250th of a second, and what you're revealing is something negative is getting to you. So you don't do that. But here's the behavior: the neck touching, neck covering of the supersternal notch. And there's another behavior. Earlier we talked about we were surrounded by predators, and one of the behaviors we did was to cover our mouths or hold still when we hear a noise. The third behavior is to cover the neck. To cover the neck, because large felines always go for the neck. And so the brain doesn't have a closet full of ties. It has about 4 choices. And those 4 behaviors are exquisite. It's proven over time that if we cover our mouth, cover the neck, don't move, they work pretty well. So we don't have to choose a lot of colors. And the other thing that sometimes you'll see people do is when you see this here in Florida, and we certainly saw it in November after the hurricane, people come to see their house and they cover their hands are up here. Oh my God, why do we do that? Again, large felines. These are shortcuts. This is heuristics that have prevailed and say, oh, no, right? and you say, well, we're no longer surrounded by them. Well, go to India. There were 238 attacks last year. It is in our DNA. It is performed out of necessity to keep us alive. So we have these reactions, but so I look at I look at the lips and the neck as good places for information.
I was just thinking then about why, yeah, you hold your head, but you also hold your head when you see something that's fallen over. So if you've seen like a building falling down in an earthquake, you immediately.
The other day, it was an old car, and it was parked at an angle on a road that was at an angle, and they forgot to set the brake, and I'm watching it slowly slide. And I found myself. I teach this stuff with my hands up here. And unfortunately, it was across the street, and I couldn't get to it fast enough, and it didn't do any damage. But you realize these shortcuts are with us for a purpose.
Much of the work you do as an FBI agent is some form of negotiation, and you spend a lot of time teaching people how to be good negotiators as well. You mentioned negotiation a second ago. I'm a business person. I do lots of negotiations, whether it's with clients or suppliers or interviews. I'm interviewing people all the time, which I consider to be a negotiation. How do I improve my negotiation skills? What are the things I should be thinking about as I go into the negotiation?
Well, they warned me. You ask profound questions. And you're right. In the FBI, I mean, when you're trying to convince someone to tell us the truth and put themselves in jeopardy, that is nothing but negotiations. You may look at it as interviewing, but like you said, even a conversation. I look at negotiations in the same way that I look at interviewing. It's in the simplest form, it's effective communication with a purpose. So you say, well, that's highly simplistic. I've never heard that. Well, think of it. Well, what is the purpose? Okay, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Either you have something I need or want or that. But there has to be communication, and there has to be an understanding of what I mean and what I intend and so forth. So for me, it's a reminder of when I first came into the FBI, an old timer said to me, interviewing isn't about the confession. And I looked at him like, what? What do you, excuse me? What do you mean not about the confession? He says, you'll get the confession. Interviewing is about FaceTime. If you can get people to talk to you for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, in one case, I interviewed an individual for 12 hours. They'll tell you everything you need to know, but you got to keep them in the room. And so I always view negotiations of, number one is, how do I communicate with you in a way that you'll want to talk to me for however long it takes to get to that purpose, which is the transaction. Now, if I'm evaluating you for your services, or if I'm negotiating for prices, I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to lay out what I'm interested in achieving, and then reconciling or working around whatever discrepancies or issues there may be. I think when we look at negotiations that way, we can say, well, that means I got to do a lot of stuff up front, which is, who am I communicating with? Who am I going to negotiate with? What's their negotiating style? Are they stoic? Do they come in? Do they throw things down? I mean, I've been in negotiations where opposing counsel came in and literally walked into the room, didn't even say good morning, just threw the things down and said, I want to hear the numbers. Okay, then how do we begin to deal with that? Because someone that comes in and is aggressive and so forth, you've got to deal with.
What do you do? Do you rise to their aggression, or do you try and bring them down to your position?
Great question. The worst thing you can do is rise to that. You begin to dominate them by taking control of time. Whoever controls time controls. And so they come in, they throw the things down. So usually, we'll start with, well, good morning to you too. Let's cut to the chase. And then the whole team I'm working with knows we're going to slow things down. We are not going to be working at that pace, because if you work at that pace, they're taking control. And so we slow things down. And there's several strategies. You can become, all of a sudden, you can become very visual and say, all right, we're going to, write this down, and we're going to put this here. We're going to put, and then this is the difference of, there's a lot of strategies. But the first thing is we've got to get that person to understand that we negotiate, hopefully, as equals. But if the perception is always that that person is negotiating as the bully or is always in charge, you're never going to have equity. Now, I've had a lot of clients that have said, hey, I've tried all your strategies, and, this guy I'm dealing with is just, he's crass. He's just a bully. He comes in and he's stuff like, and so one of the questions I always ask is he the only source? Is he or she the only source? Number one. And number two is, how long are you willing to tolerate this person? Because we failed to look at that. He gives you headaches. You don't sleep well every time you go to this. I'm thinking of one client in particular. You come away with a nervous stomach, how long are you willing to tolerate that? If you're willing to tolerate it, then, he's not going to change his style. Then you come in and we change our exposure. So we're not going to expose all of our staff to that kind of negativity. We send in our burst person and say, look, here are the numbers, and we work with that. But there are ways to dealing with the very toxic, but we don't allow them to get away with everything, nor think that they're in charge. And we do it in subtle ways. And we sort of derail their agenda. Maybe their agenda, based on past meetings, was to come in and just throw these things at us very quickly. Then we have to adjust to that. So there has to be rehearsed strategies for dealing with that.
One of the things your work made me think about is how important it is to literally write down the goal of my negotiation before I go into the negotiation, or else you might get swept up in the emotion of it and the sort of heat of the moment.
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first one to find yourself in a meeting negotiating, and all of a sudden it's like, what are we actually negotiating for? And so that's why I like the simplicity of effective communication with a purpose as a form of negotiations, but to also understand what is my role. What is my role, and what is my purpose in being there? Because many times we go into negotiations and the chief financial officer is there. Ding. Sometimes we go in there and, your first assistant is always there also, but you also have in-office counsel that is in attendance. What's their role? And what is my role? Something so simple as, what are you going to do? Look straight ahead the whole time your attorney is speaking? Or are you going to look at him? Well, we know from the research that by looking at the person who's actually talking on your side actually potentiates the gravity of what he's saying, that at the most emphatic points that when that attorney makes, and you did this earlier, you want to steeple, because steeple is the most powerful gesture that we have to convey confidence.
Steepling is in this sort of hand
Is
gesture.
this former German Chancellor Angela Merkel did this a lot. You see Musk do this a lot. You see Steve Jobs used to a lot of pictures of Steve Jobs doing that. But you reserve that for that point in time when you want to emphasize. And so the worst thing you can do is just to sit there dormant. And in fact, we have research, and it's called the still face experiments. And that is that the worst thing you can do is sit at a meeting and hold a still face. You're perceived as a threat, you're perceived as less trustworthy, you're perceived as insignificant. Corner of your mouths are down, eye roll to the right, Stephen. That's how you're perceived. and that's what happens. The experiments, which were done first with babies, found that if you take a baby, and it's called the still face experiments, if you take a baby and you look away and look back and smile, the baby's content. You can do that several times, but on the last one, you turn around and you hold very still. The babies become uncontrollable. They have fits. They're really troubled by that. So the experimenters said, well, yeah, but at what age does that leave us? So they decided to do it with adults. Adults do the same thing. If you and I are talking and we're exchanging faces, the worst thing I can do is then sit there.
It is
You see,
unnerving.
you find it disconcerting.
Yeah.
And what the brain perceives is a threat. And you lose trustworthiness.
Because you can't read what this person's thinking either way. I'd rather you be unhappy than at least I can put that in a box.
Well, that's one way to look at it. I'm not sure that anybody knows the precise reason for it, but what we do understand is that the still face, which if you're in a virtual call, you want to nod, you want to tilt your head, you want to make different gestures, but the worst thing you can do is hold still. And then in negotiations, when you're talking to the team and saying, look, when we're going in there, I don't want anybody to just sit there. I want expressions. And when someone is speaking, you're looking at them in the same way that the other side would do. But you have to plan. Now, the other thing I find with negotiators, one thing I did in the FBI is I always planned my interviews in exquisite detail. Who would enter the room first? Who would say what? Where I would sit? Who gets offered water and when? Because I need to be in control. Who's going to say what? These are things people don't think about, but at the levels with the people that I deal with, you have to have a certain amount of advantage. You have to have a certain amount of psychological leverage to say, look, you may be the world's largest manufacturer of this, and I'm just starting out, but I am not down here. And so I would appreciate if you would begin to value me. And I do that by doing certain things in the manner that I walk in. Who walks in first? Where do I sit? What gestures do I use to point, right? So you never use your finger. You always use the full hand in the vertical position. You take command of the situation and it looks aesthetically pleasing. Oh, isn't it nice? He's offering me something to drink. Or the assistant or someone says, what would you like some tea? How would you like it? And so forth. And what we're actually witnessing is the transformation of you have now become the dominant person by becoming the archetypal, the father or mother figure.
Because you're offering something.
Because you're offering it and you're in control of the food and the brain. People often wonder, well, why was it in Stockholm, Sweden back in the 70s that the Stockholm syndrome took hold so fast with those bank robbers, where they had such an effect on their victims that within hours, the victims were defending the bank robbers. It was very simple. They became the father figure, and the hostages became the children.
So I actually don't know that story.
What happened was there was a bank robbery, and in Stockholm, and the bank robbers went in, held the victims hostage. Eventually, they were rescued. But what they found was that in a matter of hours, the victims were rising to the defense of the criminals. And it became known as the Stockholm Syndrome. And what it showed us was the robbers became the archetype of the parent, and the hostages became the children. And in an instant, they became subservient.
Is that what happens in domestic abuse cases as well?
Yes, you nailed it. You nailed it beautifully. Yeah, you're the first person to get that right away. And that's why you often see this in domestic abuse cases. And you say, how can she just got beat up. How can she defend him? Usually the case. And you realize, oh my God, we have like a Stockholm syndrome where he's the provider. He's the only one working, or this or that. But getting back to negotiations, I think it's one of those things that I insist that if you go into negotiations, that you be treated at least as an equal. And that the minute people start to look down on you, it makes for a very difficult conversation.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.